Hi, my name is Jonathan. Thanks for taking the time to view this video. Now, for me, there's a very compelling reason to believe in the miracles of Jesus. In the Bible record, everyone who was against Jesus, that's the ruling classes of the day that were trying to discredit him and ultimately kill him, well, they never question the reality of the miracles. If you were out to ruin someone with character assassination, attacking or debunking the miracles would be the ideal first point of attack. But no one at the time tried to disprove the miracles Jesus performed actually happened. They don't try that. So, for this video, we're going to, we'll go over that later in the video, but first it will be good to show what we're going to consider. So, we'll begin with looking at why we question miracles. Now, it is a reasonable thing to wonder about the reality of them. Miracles are recorded for us in the Bible, and we'll answer how common miracles actually were in Bible times. Were they happening day after day for years on end, or were they performed sparingly? Then we'll return to thinking about Jesus. We began with one good reason for believing in his miracles, but I will back that point up from the Bible. And there are some other reasons that we can go through. And then, before the end, we'll look at the Apostle Paul, and we'll find that there are also good reasons to believe that he too performed miracles. So, why do we question miracles? Why do people question the reality of them? Well, to show this, let's make a comparison based on our lives today. Now, if a crime was committed, what would make you believe that it really happened? Would you need to have seen it for yourself, to be a first-hand eyewitness? Or would you believe it happened by simply reading about it on a news report? But what about miracles? It seems harder to swallow the idea of miracles being real. So what could make you believe that a miracle happened if you weren't there to experience it for yourself? What would it take? Now, to be clear, that the miracles that we're talking about are not the sort of sports commentary style, he spun off the bend there into the tire wall on the final lap, and it's frankly a miracle that he's walked away from that. No, the miracles that we're considering can't be explained as luck or even a trick or hoax, but they are events that go against our understanding of nature and of physics. We're thinking of miracles such as Jesus walking on water, the sudden calming of the storm on the Sea of Galilee, feeding over 5,000 people from just 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and yes, even that miracle of raising the dead back to life. They're astounding events, and we can't grasp how they were achieved. And this is possibly the main reason why many skeptics, the reason that they give for disbelieving or criticizing the gospel accounts. The thought is that these supernatural events simply can't happen because they go against nature, they go against the known laws of the universe. However, if we accept God as the creator of that universe, then he has the ability, he has the authority to not just override those laws that he's put in place, but also he's got the authority to allow trusted individuals to perform miracles on his behalf. If we believe this, if we understand this, we find that there is a clear logic in him giving this ability to his son, Jesus. Well, there's another reason people question miracles, and that is familiarity. I asked a moment ago what it would take to make you believe in a crime being committed, and by contrast, what would it take to make you believe in a miracle taking place? One of these things is easy to believe in. The other is not. Sadly, crimes occur every day, and they are widely reported to us. So even though we may not experience crime in our lives, we see and feel its impact in the world, and we know individuals who have been more affected by it. We find it easy, don't we, to believe in the everyday. But in something that we haven't experienced or seen, that leap from disbelief to belief, well, it becomes much wider, doesn't it? Now, unlike crime, miracles are incredibly rare. They occur when God needs to intervene more directly in the world. And we, and many generations before us, have never seen the kind of miracles that Jesus performed. And it can surprise people to learn that even in the Bible, miracles are a relatively rare occurrence. The Bible shows how many faithful people were supported in miraculous ways by God. And throughout that history, he performs miracles. But it also shows specific periods in time when God needed to establish something significant. And he needed to do this by giving events more of a shove instead of a gentle nudge. In those times, the ability of individuals, human beings, to perform miracles on God's behalf, well, that was given. But it was restricted. It was restricted to very few people. And notably, in every case, this ability to perform miracles only remained for a couple of generations. Now, the people who performed numerous miracles are Moses, Aaron, and Joshua in the Exodus, the prophets Elijah and Elisha, and they lived in a time when the nation of Israel and Samaria and Judea, it was falling into idol worship. And finally, the latest group, that's Jesus, his apostles, and other believers in the 1st century AD. These small groups, comparatively small groups, if you consider the span of history, these small groups lived many centuries apart. So, for the majority of people living through history, these overt, really attention-grabbing miracles have not been an everyday occurrence. And viewer, you and I stand with that group today, and we cannot perform miracles. Now, although we can't perform miracles, there are still good reasons to believe that Jesus has. So let's look at a few of those now. At the start, I said that the enemies of Jesus never questioned the miracles. They certainly asked why Jesus performed miracles, especially on the Sabbath, but they never questioned that the miracles actually took place. Now, to prove this, we find a man called Nicodemus. He revealed to Jesus that the rulers knew that he was a teacher from God. Now, Nicodemus, he was a Pharisee. He was a member of the ruling council, the Sanhedrin, that as a group, as a group as a whole, were opposed to Jesus. I say as a whole, except for just a few individuals who appear in the narrative, such as Nicodemus. And so we find that he is this outlier figure, and he knows what the council is discussing. So Nicodemus was different from his fellow politicians. He was willing to listen to Jesus. And we see in John chapter 2, verse 23, first of all, how at the time of the Passover, this time when many would gather together for the Passover feast in Jerusalem, many saw and believed the signs or miracles that Jesus was doing. Now, we can't say for sure, but I suspect Nicodemus, because it was a time of, being at the feast, and the Pharisees would likely have good seats at the feast, I suppose. I suspect that Nicodemus perhaps saw some of these signs, these miracles for himself, along with other members of the council. And you can imagine they discuss it among themselves and say, well, how's this being done? I think they just have to accept it. They have to accept it's real. So then at the start of the next chapter, Nicodemus visits Jesus at night, and he reveals this crucial detail. He gives Jesus this insight into what the council has been thinking about. And he says, we, that's the group of rulers, that's the council, we know that you are a teacher come from God. For no one can do these signs, but you do, unless God is with him. The rulers could not refute the fact that these miracles were happening, and they would have been desperately looking for a loophole, some kind of trick. but they couldn't find it, and they had to conclude that they were seeing miracles. And just think about these additional points. If the miracles were some form of elaborate hoax, then at the time when Jesus was arrested and put on trial before his crucifixion, well, that would have been the perfect time, wouldn't it, for Judas, the close disciple who betrayed Jesus, the perfect time for him to come forward as a witness and claim, the miracles as being a hoax. But he doesn't. He doesn't do it. And it's also telling that at the trial of Jesus, the reality of the miracles, the fact that they happened, it was never brought up as a question. By this time, those miracles that Jesus performed, they were accepted as undeniable fact. So, what was making it so hard for the rulers to refute the miracles? Why couldn't they cover it up? Even if they admitted that they were happening, why couldn't they cover it up from the people? Well, I asked earlier, what could make you believe a miracle happened if you weren't there to experience it for yourself? What would it take? Would you believe a news report? Or would you feel more convinced with many friends and family, colleagues, and more people besides, all telling you that they saw a miracle? They tell you, we were there, we saw it for ourselves. So, the Bible records miracles that were seen by not just a few, but hundreds, even thousands of people. This is why the rulers couldn't make an argument against the miracles. The sheer number of witnesses to these events could not be denied. And we often read of miracles happening, followed by the rulers, these things that they're hanging around, followed by the rulers confronting Jesus with a question. So it's clear, isn't it, that the rulers were there with the crowds. They are seeing these things for themselves. And it is exactly as Nicodemus had said. The rulers were convinced that Jesus was a teacher from God because of the miracles. As mentioned, miracles are relatively rare, but there are instances where they have been well reported. The best example of this is the resurrection of Jesus, which has both physical and eyewitness evidence to support it. So this quote is from the start of the book of Acts, written by Luke. It shows Jesus was with the people for 40 days. It says there, Jesus presented himself alive to them after his sufferings, that's after his crucifixion, by many proofs, appearing to them during 40 days. So he was with the people for a good long time. He was showing that he was no longer dead, but rather very much alive. And the Apostle Paul later wrote of the number of people that saw Jesus after his resurrection. People that the readers could, at that time, they could go and find, and they could speak with these people, and they could question this for themselves, and they could receive an answer from real, living eyewitnesses. So, as I say, the Apostle Paul, he wrote about this. We'll see that quote later on. Now, speaking of resurrection, the raising of the widow of Nain's son in Luke's gospel account is a miracle with very compelling details that prove it is true. It's in chapter 7, so let's see how it begins. So from Luke 7, verse 11. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow. So this lady, she's lost her husband and she's lost her son. It continues, a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. Notice the details. A great crowd of people was already with Jesus, so that there's lots of people already there who are going to see this. We find that they're at the gate of the town. Now, around town gates in those days, there were guards. There were also people trading, trading to the travelers passing in and out of the town. And this means anyone who hadn't seen the miracle, and if they were wondering about it, well, they could go to exactly where it took place They could check with the people who were there day by day. In addition to the crowd that was with Jesus, there's also a large number as part of the funeral procession. It was a funeral, so it was already a memorable event. I mean, how many funerals have you been to where the main participant, if you like, gets to walk away before the end? This would really stand out. Well, let's look at what happened next. So, from verse 14 it says, "Then he," that's Jesus, Jesus came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. This miracle, it astounded the people. They were euphoric about it. It says fear seized them, but they're just wondering about it, aren't they? And it says the people shared the report of it to the whole region of Judea and further afield. This means it could easily be fact-checked with a lot of people. There were loads of people there witnessing this. There was no way the authorities could suppress something like this. It was just too big, too big. So our second reason for believing the miracles of Jesus is that there were witnesses to them everywhere. Well, let's move on to our third reason. Now, I personally accept the Bible record as truth, but we appreciate that some may look for sources further afield. So, there's a man, Flavius Josephus. He was a historian known for writing the Antiquities of the Jews. He writes this history. It's called the Antiquities of the Jews. And it's important to note that Josephus was a Jew. He was not a Christian. He wasn't a convert. He was a Jew. And this means that in his book, due to his own personal convictions, he devotes a lot of time to writing about a number of prominent Jewish individuals, lots of time for Moses and so on. But by contrast, Jesus is mentioned very little, almost in passing. Now, I'll put the quote here on the screen. Despite, like I say, him writing almost just in passing, Josephus still included enough detail to confirm that it was widely reported and widely known that this man made miracles happen. In particular, Josephus notes Jesus was wise. He calls him, a wise man. And he says that he was a doer of wonderful works. Now, this is a repeated phrase. He uses this same phrase, a doer of wonderful works. He uses that same phrase much earlier in his book, to describe the Old Testament prophet Elijah. And it elaborates there that this means miracles. So this is an external source that reports not only that Jesus lived, but also that he did indeed work miracles. Now, just as an aside, a friend passed me this comment the other day, noting how the universe itself and the life within it are evidence of miracles. These are the biggest of outside sources, just to look at the world around us and the universe. And he said this, so I'll read this quote to you. He said, "Even atheists have to believe in miracles." Sounds curious, doesn't it? He says, even atheists have to believe in miracles because the universe exists and we live in it. The most obvious miracles are the bringing of the universe into existence, because this violates every physical law. You can't get something from nothing. And the creation of life. So saying that's the other big miracle. The creation of life, which mathematically is at the very least impossibly unlikely. And he continues, any skeptic who believes that these two things have happened, that the universe exists and that there is life, automatically believes in miracles. They just might not know it. Well, let's continue. Now, we've just seen a few compelling reasons for believing in the miracles of Jesus. Let's just move on to our final part. Let's look at Paul. Now, Our video title is about the miracles of Jesus, which are recorded in the gospel accounts. But it's worth adding something about what happened a number of years after his resurrection. Now, I mentioned how the ability of individuals to perform miracles usually lasted a couple of generations. Well, the Apostle Paul, someone who began completely opposed to the rising group of Christians, he was part of that next generation that was still able to perform miracles. So, the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, to give it its full title, the book of Acts details his journeys to preach abroad, and many of Paul's miracles are on record. And again, there are compelling reasons to believe that Paul performed these miracles. And if we can believe this, then how much more confident we can be that Jesus also performed miracles. Now, you see how one set of facts, it will help support the other. So what makes us confident about Paul's miracles also being true? Well, we can see that the books that appear after Acts are in fact letters. They are letters that are penned by Paul, written to the various groups of believers that he had established or whom he had contact with. And in these letters, he reminds his readers that they had witnessed him working miracles. Now, put yourself in Paul's position. You would have to be very foolish to claim this in writing, to claim that you had performed miracles in writing, if you had not, in fact, performed miracles in front of these people. If you hadn't, and the people you were writing to would be absolutely sure to call you out and to tell others about it. Now, Paul was writing to large groups, so he was clearly confident that many people had seen the miracles that he did and that they knew that they were true. Now, to prove this, let's just see some of those letters. So, let's begin. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5. He says, because our gospel came to you not only in word, so saying we didn't just come and talk to you, he says, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction. You know what kind of men we proved to be among you for your sake. So he's saying there, there was something more than them just speaking. And it's definitely seems to be striking of the miracles. There was power and in the Holy Spirit. And they were using their Holy Spirit gifts granted by God to perform miracles. And then 1 Corinthians chapter 2, from verse 4, he says, my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. So again, he's saying this isn't just words, but it was in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. So again, this seems to strongly hint he did miracles for them. We've got a couple more. Again, he writes to the Corinthians, another letter. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he writes, and in this, to give a bit of context, he's having to defend himself as an apostle. People had thrown doubts on Paul about who he was. People were trying to, they were trying character assassination. They were trying to bring Paul down in various ways. And so Paul is writing to defend himself against various naysayers. And so he does this by presenting his full credentials, if you like, and he's forced into, he sort of volunteers into a form of boasting. And also repeatedly uses this phrase, I speak as a fool. He says, this is a foolish thing that we're doing, but there's more to it. Story for another time, you could say. But he says, I've been a fool. You forced me to it, for I ought to have been commended by you. He's saying, there are all these critics, but actually, really, there should have been commendation here. For, continues, for I was not at all inferior to these super apostles, even though I am nothing. He's showing actual humility. He says, even though I am nothing, the signs of a true apostle were performed among you with utmost patience, with signs and wonders and mighty works. And he's saying that the sign of a true apostle, someone who had been sent by Jesus, was someone who could, at that time, use the Holy Spirit gifts, that it could perform miracles. Galatians chapter 3, he says, Does he who supplies the Spirit, there's that power again, he says, who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you, do so by works of the law or by hearing with faith? So again, he's talking about these gifts to perform the miracles. And, if these things weren't true, the people would have absolutely called him out. So, in addition to his own miracles, Paul also wrote often, and he spoke at length about the truth of another miracle, the resurrection of Jesus. Now, you can pause the video here to read the quote. This was a well-established event from their very recent history. So again, if that attested fact wasn't known about, then Paul would have been really foolish to write about it. But the fact that he is confidently writing about his miracles and about the risen Jesus of Nazareth, because Paul and his readers knew all these things were true, he's being confident in this, isn't it? This is what he's going to do. And because they were witnesses living in or very close to the time of Jesus, well, that gives us confidence. It gives us confidence that although we live centuries later, we don't see miracles today, these things are true events. They have really happened. We have to accept what they saw and what they experienced. Now, there are still more reasons to believe the miracles of Jesus have really happened, but I hope that what we've shared in this video is enough to help you consider the truth, the reality of those miracles. The fact Jesus was raised back to life is itself evidence for all of this being true. If that had not happened, if he hadn't been raised, with many people seeing him alive, then Christianity would be as dead as his body in the tomb. But he lives. And this is why we are sharing these wonderful things that give us hope for the future. So, thank you for watching. If you found this beneficial, then please click that thumbs up button, because that helps us to share this content with a wider audience. And sharing the video and subscribing to this channel would also be much appreciated. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.